For today, under the wide embrace of the African sky, we share a tale that travels from the bustling markets of Lagos to the quiet corners of the human heart. This is the story of Chijioke, a man whose wealth shone like the noon sun, yet whose very breath carried a curse that could silence a marketplace brawl. And this is the story of Adaora, a woman so beautiful she could calm the raging seas, but whose heart was clouded by a greed deeper than the river Niger. He was a king in his castle of cars, believing his money could buy love. She was a hunter in silk, seeing only the glitter and not the ghost that haunted his gold. Their union was not a meeting of souls, but a collision of pride and desire, a lesson for every young man and woman listening today. So I ask you, and ask you plainly, what is the true price of the wealth we chase? Is it worth our peace? Is it worth our very soul? Remember the wisdom of our elders. A man who pursues money without purpose is like a farmer who waters the leaves and neglects the roots. Chijioke inherited riches, but they were wrapped in a shadow that stole his dignity. Adaora desired treasure, but she failed to see that some gold is stained with sorrow. This is why, before you join your life with another, look beyond the fine clothes and sweet words. Ask, does this person have a generous spirit? Is their character clean, like a river stone? For a marriage built on money alone is a house built on the beach. When the tide of trouble comes, it will surely wash away. You are listening to Echoes from the Baobab tree, a sanctuary where the spirit of Africa lives through stories of love, betrayal, and redemption passed down through generations. Here, we keep the old ways alive, one story at a time. If your heart feels stirred by this tale, do not walk this path alone. Join our family, subscribe to the channel, tap that like button, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Together, we keep the echo alive. Now, let us step into the world of Chijioke and Adaora, and witness how a single curse can reveal the truest faces of those we trust. Let's continue the story. It was on a hot, dusty Monday afternoon in the bustling Oyingbo market in Lagos. The sun was beating down without mercy. Two men, Emeka and Choku, were locked in a furious fight over a parking space. Their shouts were loud, their fists were flying, and a thick crowd had gathered, cheering and shouting, their phones held high to record the chaos. It seemed like nothing could stop them. That is, until Chijioke arrived. Chijioke, a rich car dealer from the island, pushed his way through the crowd. "Stop this nonsense," he boomed, his voice full of authority. He stepped right between the two sweating, angry men. And then, he opened his mouth to speak again. Listeners, what happened next will shock you. The moment Chijioke's breath hit them, the entire scene froze. Emeka, whose fist was pulled back ready to strike, suddenly froze. His eyes widened in horror. He looked at Chijioke's mouth as if he had seen a ghost. Choku, who was gripping Emeka's shirt, started to cough violently. He let go, waving his hands frantically in front of his face as if swatting away a swarm of invisible bees. The smell, oh, the smell. It was a powerful mixture of rotten eggs, 3-day-old trash, and something even worse that nobody could name. It hit the two fighters like a physical slap. Emeka dropped his fist. Choku took a step back, his anger completely forgotten. Without a single word to each other, they both turned and hurried away, disappearing into the market crowd, still coughing and holding their noses. The crowd fell into a stunned silence. Then, someone whispered, "Wait, oh. Did this man's mouth just separate the fight?" A wave of laughter erupted across the market. But Chijioke, he didn't hear the joke. He puffed out his chest, smoothed down his expensive agbada, and walked back to his air-conditioned car, a proud smile on his face. He believed his powerful presence and commanding voice had brought peace. My dear friends, if only he knew the truth. What he didn't know was that this was just the beginning of his troubles. His journey, filled with money, love, and a secret he never saw coming, was about to take a very dark turn. But to understand how he got here, we must go back to the beginning. Chijioke was one of the most successful businessmen in all of Lagos. His car stand on Victoria Island was the place to find the best and most expensive cars. He was rich, he dressed in the finest clothes, and he drove the flashiest cars. People knew his name. But they also knew something else, something they only whispered behind his back. Talking to Chijioke was a dangerous mission for your nose. The smell from his mouth was not ordinary. It was strong, oh so strong. It was like a mixture of expired beans, dried fish left in the sun, and a broken sewer. People struggled to listen to him because even when he was making a very good business deal, the smell from his mouth made it hard to think. Can you imagine? But Chijioke was a very proud man. He loved to show off his wealth. He believed people avoided him because they were poor and he was too great for them. He thought they were intimidated by his success and his confidence. He never, ever thought the problem was his own mouth. His love life was a string of disasters. In 3 years, he had dated more than 5 beautiful women from Abuja to Port Harcourt. None of them stayed for more than 2 months. One woman, name was Ngozi, only lasted 1 week. The poor girl held her breath for so long that she fainted and had to be taken to the hospital. Chijioke would just shake his head and say, "These women cannot handle a strong man like me." One sunny afternoon, a very important politician from Abuja came to his car stand. The man wanted to buy 5 brand new jeeps for his campaign. Chijioke was overjoyed. This was a huge sale. "Good afternoon, sir." Chijioke shouted happily, rushing out to shake the man's hand. The politician, a tall man in a big white hat, smiled a polite smile. "Afternoon, my brother. I like your cars. I will take 5. Chijioke was too excited. He leaned in close to discuss the price. "Sir, because you are a great man, I will give you a special discount." He never finished his sentence. The politician's smile vanished. His face changed. His eyes began to water. He coughed and stepped back so quickly he almost tripped. He whispered to his assistant, "You handle this for me," and then he almost ran back to his own car. Chijioke stood there, confused. The assistant, holding his breath and speaking in a tight, quick voice, said, "My Oga says no discount. Just give us the 5 cars. Here is the payment." The assistant quickly handed over a check and hurried away, gasping for fresh air. Chijioke looked at the check in his hand. He was confused for a moment, but then pride took over. He smiled wide. "Oh, see how my marketing skills are," he said to himself. "I am so good, I don't even need to finish my sentences before they pay me." He called himself the best marketer in Lagos. He had no idea that the politician just wanted to escape his breath and survive the day. But soon, something happened that would shake his proud world to its very foundation. A woman named Adaora walked into his life. She was from a rich family in Enugu, beautiful, with skin like smooth chocolate and a smile that could light up a dark room. But Adaora was not there for love. She had heard stories about Chijioke's wealth, and she wanted a piece of it for herself. Her friends warned her. "Adaora, that man's mouth odor can chase a lion away," they said. But Adaora just laughed. "My dear, money has its own special perfume," she replied. She walked into his car stand that Tuesday, looking like a Nollywood movie star. Chijioke saw her and his heart jumped. She was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "Good afternoon, Ma," he said, his voice soft with admiration. When he spoke, Adaora felt like she had been punched in the stomach. The smell hit her so hard she saw stars for a second. But she was a strong woman, and her greed was even stronger. She held her breath, forced her sweetest smile, and blinked back the tears that the smell had brought to her eyes. "I am here to see the great Chijioke," she said, her voice like music. "I have heard so much about you." Chijioke was charmed. He spent the next hour showing her his most expensive cars, talking and talking. Adaora smiled and nodded, feeling dizzy, planning her escape to fresh air every few minutes. But she never let her smile drop. At the end of the visit, she agreed to have dinner with him that weekend. As she finally got into her car, she took deep, grateful breaths of the Lagos smog. Her phone rang. It was her friend. Adaora, how did it go? Are you still alive? Adaora coughed. It was successful, she said, her voice shaky. But if I die during this dinner, please tell my mother I died for a good cause. The night of the dinner arrived. Chijioke took her to the most expensive restaurant in Lagos, high up in a tall building with a view of the ocean. He was dressed in his best suit. He looked at Adaora with love in his eyes. He began to tell her how beautiful she was, how she was the woman of his dreams. And with every word, a wave of that terrible smell washed over the table. The candles on the table seemed to flicker weakly. Adaora's eyes watered constantly. She desperately wanted to run away, but the thought of his money, his houses, his cars, it glued her to the chair. She looked him straight in the eye, fighting the urge to gag, and said, Chijioke, you are the most unforgettable man I have ever met. Chijioke's heart swelled with happiness. He was falling in love. But Adaora. She was just counting the cost. And little did Chijioke know that this dinner would set him on a path towards a discovery so shocking, it would threaten to destroy everything he thought he knew about himself. A secret that was hiding in plain sight, waiting to be revealed in the most devastating way possible. And that revelation began the very next day, when he decided to visit Adaora's family house in Enugu to officially ask for her hand in marriage. He arrived with bags of expensive gifts, his heart full of hope. But as he stepped out of his sleek car and opened his mouth to greet her mother, the woman's smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unfiltered horror. She took one step back, then fainted clean away, collapsing right there on the veranda in front of everyone. Chaos erupted on the neatly swept veranda of the family house in Enugu. One moment, Mama Nkechi was standing there, a proud smile on her face as her daughter's rich suitor arrived. The next moment, she was crumpled on the ground, her eyes rolled back into her head. The expensive ceramic bowl she had been holding shattered on the concrete floor, scattering coconuts everywhere. Mama! Mama! Adaora screamed, rushing to her mother's side. Her father, Papa Emeka, a stern-looking man in a traditional Aesaigu shirt, stared in shock from the doorway. Chijioke stood frozen, his hand still outstretched in greeting, his mouth still open. The words, "Good afternoon, Ma," seemed to hang in the air, poisoning it. A deep, hot shame began to crawl up his neck. He saw the way Adaora's younger siblings, who had been peeking from the window, were now staring at him with wide, frightened eyes. He saw the quick, knowing glance that passed between Papa Emeka and a sharp-faced auntie. This was not like the market fight. This was not a politician running away. This was different. This was a woman, a mother, collapsing in her own home because of him. "It's the heat," Chijioke blurted out, his voice trembling with panic. "The sun is too much today. Let me get water." But nobody was listening to him. They were all crowded around Mama Nkechi, who was now moaning softly as they found her face. The auntie, Auntie Uche, turned and looked directly at Chijioke. Her eyes were not frightened or confused. They were sharp and accusing, like a hawk that had just spotted its prey. "The heat, you say," she said, her voice low and dangerous. She didn't say anything else, but her look said everything. It said, "We know what you are." The joyful visit was over before it began. The planned discussion of bride price, the sharing of a meal, the laughter, all of it vanished like smoke. After Mama Nkechi was revived and helped inside, Papa Emeka came back onto the veranda. His face was like a mask. "Mr. Chijioke," he said, his voice cold and formal. "Thank you for your visit. My wife is not feeling well. You should go." Chijioke, feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his life, could only nod. He mumbled an apology, placed the bags of gifts by the door, and walked back to his car. He didn't look at Adaora. He couldn't. The drive back to Lagos was the longest, quietest drive of his life. The memory of Mom Nkechi fainting played over and over in his mind, a terrible, silent movie of his own disgrace. A week passed. The shame from Enugu festered inside Chijioke like a wound. He started to notice things he had always ignored. He saw the subtle way his assistant, Femi, would turn his head to the side and take a shallow breath before speaking to him. He noticed how customers would always maintain a careful distance, as if he had an invisible force field around him. He remembered the women who left him, the fights that stopped, the politician who fled. For the first time, a terrifying question whispered in his ear, "What if it's me?" He pushed the thought away. It was easier to be angry. When Adaora called him, her voice was cold. "Chijioke, what happened at my parents' house was a disgrace," she said. "My mother has been in bed since that day. She says she has a constant headache." "It was the sun, Adaora. I told you." Chijioke insisted, his pride flaring up. "My family house is cool." "There was no sun," she snapped back. There is something wrong, Chijioke. And until you fix it, we cannot talk about marriage." The phone call ended. Chijioke was left with a silent office and a roaring in his ears. Fix it? Fix what? What was he supposed to fix? That evening, driven by a mixture of defiance and a growing, gnawing fear, he decided to prove everyone wrong. He went to a big pharmacy in Ikeja. He bought the most expensive toothpaste he could find, one from abroad with special charcoal. He bought a powerful mouthwash that promised to kill 99.9% of germs. He bought a new toothbrush with hard bristles. He went home and stood in front of his bathroom mirror. He brushed his teeth. He brushed for 10 whole minutes, scrubbing until his gums were sore and tinged with pink. He gargled the mouthwash, swishing the burning liquid around in his mouth for a full minute, feeling like a scientist conducting a very important experiment. He leaned close to the mirror, cupped his hands over his mouth, and breathed out deeply through his nose. He sniffed. He sniffed again. Nothing. Just the clean, minty smell of the mouthwash. A wave of relief and triumph washed over him. "See," he said to his reflection, a wide smile breaking out on his face. "There is no problem. It is all in their heads. They are all jealous. I am Chijioke. I am successful." He felt like a king who had reclaimed his throne. All his worries melted away. It was them, not him. They were the ones with the problem. He decided he would go and see Adaora the next day and show her. He would speak to her so closely, and she would smell only mint and success. She would have to apologize. The next morning, he dressed with extra care, putting on a new blue border. He felt confident. He felt powerful again. He drove to Adaora's apartment in Lekki, a bouquet of red roses on the passenger seat. He didn't call ahead. He wanted to surprise her. He arrived at her door, his heart beating with excitement. He knocked. Adaora opened the door. She was in a simple wrapper, her hair tied up. She looked surprised to see him, and not in a happy way. "Chijioke, what are you doing here?" "My love," he said, his voice booming with confidence. He stepped forward, right into her doorway, ignoring the personal space she usually kept. He thrust the flowers towards her. "I have come to apologize for the misunderstanding at your parents' house." He leaned in close, intending to give her a peck on the cheek. And then, he spoke the words he had practiced. "Adaora, you are the only one for me." His breath, warm and loaded with the morning's efforts, hit her full in the face. The change was instant and horrible. The mint from the toothpaste had lasted for perhaps 30 seconds after he left his house. Underneath it, the familiar, terrible odor had risen again, even stronger now, mixed with the sharp, chemical smell of the mouthwash. It was a new, horrifying cocktail of stench. Adaora's face twisted. She gagged violently, stumbling back into her apartment. The beautiful roses fell from her hands, scattering red petals on the floor. Chijioke, stop, she shrieked, covering her nose and mouth with both hands. Her eyes were streaming with tears now, but this time they were not from holding her breath. They were tears of pure, unfiltered revulsion. Your mouth. For God's sake, your mouth. It smells like death. I can't take it anymore. Chijioke stood there, on the threshold of her home, the words hitting him harder than any punch ever could. The flowers lay at his feet. The confident smile was still stuck on his face, but his eyes were filled with a dawning, awful horror. She had said it. The woman he loved had finally said the words out loud. The truth he had been running from his entire life was now screaming in his face. And as he stared into Adaora's disgust-filled eyes, his whole world, built on money and pride, shattered into a million pieces right there on her doorstep. The king was finally dethroned, not by a rival, but by his own breath. For a long, terrible moment, Chijioke did not move. He stood on Adaora's doorstep, a statue of shame. The words, "It smells like death," echoed in his ears, louder than the Lagos traffic, louder than his own heartbeat. He watched as Adaora slammed the door shut, the sound a final, thunderous end to everything he had hoped for. The drive home was a blur. He didn't see the roads or the other cars. All he could see was the look of pure disgust on Adaora's face. It was a look that stripped him of all his wealth, all his confidence, all his pride. He was no longer Chijioke, the successful car dealer. He was just a man with a rotten mouth. He locked himself in his house in Ikoyi for 3 days. He didn't go to work. He didn't answer his phone. The mighty Chijioke had finally fallen, and the silence of his big, empty mansion was his only company. He sat in the dark living room, running his tongue over his teeth, trying to smell what everyone else smelled, but he couldn't. He was trapped in a prison whose walls were made of a stench only others could perceive. On the 4th day, a determined knock came at his door. It was his oldest friend, Kola. Chijioke didn't want to open it, but the knocking was persistent. Finally, he dragged himself to the door and opened it a crack. "Chijioke," Kola said, his face filled with worry. "People are saying you have died. You don't pick your calls. What is happening?" Chijioke just stared at him, his eyes red and empty. He opened the door wider and walked back to the sofa, collapsing into it. Kola followed him in, and as he got closer, his nose twitched slightly, but his expression remained one of concern. "Kola," Chijioke whispered, his voice rough from lack of use. "Tell me the truth. My mouth, does it smell?" Kola shifted uncomfortably. He looked at his hands, at the expensive rug, anywhere but at Chijioke's pleading eyes. "My friend," he began, his voice heavy. "Tell me." Chijioke demanded, a spark of his old fire returning, but it was a fire of desperation. Kola sighed a deep, weary sigh. "Chijioke, yes. It is true. For a long time now." Hearing it from his oldest friend was the final blow. Chijioke buried his face in his hands. The stories came pouring out of him then, the fainting mother, the fleeing politician, the stopped fight, the woman who left, and finally, Adaora screamed rejection. He told Kola about the toothpaste, the mouthwash, the hours of brushing. "I brushed until my gums bled, Kola," he cried out. "I went to the hospital. They said there is nothing wrong. So what is it? Am I cursed?" The word hung in the air between them. "Cursed?" Kola was silent for a long time. Then he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "My brother, since you have said it yourself, I must tell you. Modern medicine has failed. Perhaps this is not a problem for doctors. Perhaps it is a spiritual problem." Chijioke looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. What do you mean? There is a man, Kola said carefully. A Babulawo in a town in Ogun State. His name is Baobab. People say he can solve problems that hospitals cannot. Problems that have deeper roots. A spiritual doctor. Chijioke, a man who went to church every Sunday, had never considered such a thing. But he was desperate. He had nowhere else to turn. Give me the address, Chijioke said, his voice firm with new determination. The very next morning, Chijioke set out for the remote town. He drove for hours, the tall buildings of Lagos giving way to smaller towns, and then to villages and finally, to a bumpy, red dirt road that cut through thick green forest. He found the small, modest house exactly where Kola had directed him. Baobab was an old man with wise, kind eyes and deep lines on his face. He listened quietly as Chijioke poured out his entire story, from the beginning to the very end. The old man didn't flinch or react when Chijioke spoke. He just listened. When Chijioke was finished, Baobab nodded slowly. My son, he said. Open your mouth. Chijioke leaned forward and opened his mouth. Baobab peered inside. He then closed his eyes and placed his hands on Chijioke's head, muttering softly in a language Chijioke didn't understand. The room grew still. The only sound was the chirping of birds outside. After a few minutes, Baobab's eyes snapped open. They were no longer kind. They were wide and serious. This is not a sickness of the body, the old man declared, his voice grave. This is a curse. It is tied to an object. A metal object you wear. It is a ring. Chijioke's heart skipped a beat. His eyes dropped to his right hand. On his middle finger was a heavy, gold ring with a large, dark black stone. It was the only thing he had left of his father, a man who had also been very wealthy but had died a sad and lonely death. Chijioke had worn it every single day for over 10 years, believing it was his lucky charm. This? Chijioke asked, his voice trembling as he pointed at the ring. But, this was my father's. Baobab's face was filled with pity. The curse passes from father to son through this ring. It gives you great wealth, my son. But it takes something precious away. For you, it has taken the freshness of your breath. For your father, I cannot say. But the peace you seek, you will not find while this ring is on your finger. Chijioke stared at the ring. It gleamed in the dim light of the hut. All his success, all his money, was it all because of this? Was his entire life a lie built on a cursed object? A cold fury mixed with a terrifying fear rose inside him. He grabbed the ring and pulled. He pulled with all his might, his knuckles turning white. He twisted it, he yanked it. But the ring would not budge. It was as if it had been welded to his finger. It refused to come off. Panic seized him. He pulled harder, grunting with the effort, until the skin around his finger was raw and bleeding. It won't come off, he shouted, his voice cracking with hysteria. Why won't it come off? Baobab looked at him, his expression deeply sad. The curse does not want to let go. It has chosen you. The ring will only leave you when it is ready, or when it finds another to take your place. Chijioke left Baobab's house a broken man. The drive back to Lagos was a nightmare. The hope he had felt was gone, replaced by a deeper, more terrifying despair. He wasn't just a man with a problem. He was a man owned by a curse. The ring on his finger felt heavy and hot like a brand. He arrived back in Lagos as the sun was setting. He didn't want to go back to his empty, silent house. He drove to his car stand, thinking that being around his expensive cars, the symbols of his cursed wealth, would somehow comfort him. The stand was closed for the day, dark and quiet. He walked through the lines of silent, gleaming vehicles, his footsteps echoing. He stopped in front of his favorite, a brilliant red Ferrari. He looked at his reflection in the shiny paint, at the image of a rich, successful man. And then he looked down at the gold ring on his finger. Tears of anger and frustration welled in his eyes. He slammed his fist against the side of the Ferrari, leaving a smudge on the perfect red paint. "Why?" he yelled into the empty night. "Why me?" Suddenly, a movement caught his eye. He turned quickly. A dark figure was crouched beside one of the other cars, trying to hide. "A thief! Who is there?" Chijioke roared, his voice filled with all the rage and pain of the day. The figure, startled, stood up. It was a young, thin man with frightened eyes. He held a metal tool in his hand, trying to pry open a car door. "Oga, I beg." "No be wetin you think," the thief pleaded, taking a step back. Chijioke was not listening. All his fury had found a target. He started marching towards the thief, his body trembling with anger. "You want to steal from me? You want to take what I have worked for?" The thief, seeing the large, enraged man coming towards him, dropped his tool and turned to run. But he tripped over a curb and fell hard onto the concrete. Chijioke was upon him in seconds. He grabbed the young man by his dirty shirt collar, holding him up. He was so close he could see the fear in the boy's eyes. "You think life is easy? You think you can just take?" Chijioke screamed, his face inches from the thief's. And then, he breathed. The full, unrestrained, curse breath of Chijioke Aguri exploded directly into the young man's face. The effect was immediate and horrific. The thief's eyes rolled back into his head. A choked gaggle escaped his lips. His body went limp, not from fear, but from the overwhelming, suffocating stench. He was out cold, unconscious before he even hit the ground again. Chijioke stood over the limp body, panting with rage and shock. He had done it again. His breath had stopped a fight, but this time, it hadn't just stopped it. It had knocked a man out completely. He looked at the unconscious thief, then down at the cursed ring on his finger, glowing faintly under the security lights. A new, chilling thought crept into his mind. If his breath could do this, what other terrible power did this curse hold? And what would happen if he ever truly lost control? Chijioke stared down at the limp body of the young thief, his own rage instantly replaced by a cold, gripping fear. The boy wasn't moving. Had his breath killed him? "Hey!" Chijioke shouted, his voice shaking. He nudged the boy with his foot. No response. Panic seized him. He dropped to his knees, ignoring the rough concrete, and pressed 2 fingers against the boy's neck, something he'd seen in movies. For a terrifying second, he felt nothing. Then, a weak, but steady, pulse stamped against his fingers. Relief washed over him so strongly he felt dizzy. The boy was alive, just unconscious. Chijioke scrambled back, away from the body, as if it were on fire. He looked at his own hands, then at the ring. This was no longer just a social embarrassment. His curse was a weapon. He had just used it to knock a man out. He couldn't call the police. How would he explain it? "Officer, this man tried to steal my car, so I talked to him and he fainted." They would think he was mad. With a strength born of pure fear, he grabbed the young man under the arms and dragged him away from the car stand, propping him up against a wall in a nearby alley. He tossed a few naira notes onto the boy's lap, a twisted form of apology, and then fled back to his car, his heart pounding like a drum. He didn't sleep that night. The image of the thief collapsing played over and over in his mind. The Baobab's words echoed in his ears, "The curse does not want to let go." It was getting stronger. What would be next? The next morning, a different kind of fear arrived. His phone rang. It was Adaora. After their last meeting, he never expected to hear from her again. His hand trembled as he answered. Chijioke, her voice was sweet, too sweet, like honey hiding a bitter pill. "How are you, my dear?" He was too stunned to speak. Was this the same woman who had screamed at him and slammed the door in his face? I've been thinking, she continued, not waiting for his reply. I was too harsh. My mother, she is feeling better now. She said we should not let a small problem destroy a good thing. A small problem. Chijioke's mind raced. This didn't make sense. But the loneliness of the past weeks had been a heavy burden. The temptation to believe her, to have someone back in his life, was too powerful to resist. Really, he managed to say, his voice full of hope and suspicion. Yes, she purred. Why don't you come for dinner? Tonight. At my place. I will cook for you myself. We can talk properly. He agreed, his heart a confused mess of joy and dread. He spent the day in a frenzy, brushing his teeth until his gums were raw, using 2 whole bottles of mouthwash. He even bought a small, portable air freshener that he planned to keep in his pocket, a desperate, silly plan to spray the air around him as he talked. When he arrived at her apartment that evening, the table was beautifully set. Candles were lit. Soft music played. Adaora looked stunning. She smiled as she let him in, but her eyes were like a calculator, adding, subtracting, measuring. The meal was awkward. Adaora did most of the talking, chattering about gossip, about new businesses, about how expensive life had become. She kept a safe distance, always finding a reason to get up and move away whenever he tried to speak. She would ask him a question, then quickly turn to stir a pot or adjust a painting on the wall before he could answer, so his words would hit her back, not her face. Chijioke felt a fool. He knew what she was doing. But he played along, clinging to the fragile hope she offered. After the meal, she sat next to him on the sofa, though she left a wide space between them. She sighed dramatically. Chijioke, my love, she began, her voice dripping with false concern. This problem of yours. It must be so difficult for you. He nodded, unable to speak, his throat tight. I have been researching, she said, leaning forward slightly but still keeping her distance. I have a friend, a very powerful doctor in London. He specializes in rare conditions. I am sure he can help you. London. Chijioke's head spun. But. She sighed again, a masterful performance of sadness. The cost. Chijioke, the cost is very high. The flight, the consultation, the treatment, it could be 50 million naira. 50 million naira. The number hung in the air, huge and impossible. And then, he understood. This wasn't about reconciliation. This was a shakedown. She saw his vulnerability and was using it to extract money from him. She didn't believe he could be fixed, she just wanted a final, massive payout before she disappeared for good. The hope in his heart curdled into something dark and bitter. He looked at her beautiful, greedy face, and he saw her for what she truly was. He was a problem to be monetized. He stood up abruptly, the movement causing the air to shift. A wave of his odor, faint but persistent despite all his efforts, drifted towards her. She flinched, her mask of concern slipping for a second to reveal the disgust beneath. Adaora, he said, his voice surprisingly calm. I do not have 50 million naira to give you. Her face hardened instantly. The sweet pretense was over. Then what use are you to me? She snapped, standing up and pointing to the door. Get out, Chijioke. Get out and don't come back until you are a whole man. He left without another word. The door slammed shut behind him, this time for the final time. But as he walked to his car, a strange feeling came over him. The heartbreak was there, but it was muted. It was overshadowed by a cold, clear realization. He was alone in this. Completely alone. And the only thing he had left was the curse itself. Weeks turned into a month. Chijioke became a ghost in his own life. He stopped trying to fix the unfixable. He stopped talking almost entirely. At his car stand, he communicated with his assistant, Femi, through written notes and short grunts. Customers were handled solely by Femi. The rich, loud, proud Chijioke was gone, replaced by a silent, shadowy figure who sat in the back office and stared at the wall. He stopped brushing his teeth with the frantic energy of before. What was the point? The curse was in the ring, not in his mouth. The smell grew worse, becoming a thick, permanent cloud around him, a visible manifestation of his despair. People now crossed the street to avoid walking near him. One evening, as he was closing up the car stand, Femi came into the office, looking nervous. "Oga," Femi said, keeping his distance near the door. "There is a man outside. He says he must speak with you. Personally." Chijioke didn't look up from his desk. He just waved a dismissive hand. "But Oga," Femi insisted, his voice a nervous whisper. "He is not a normal man. He is the father of that thief. The one from that night." Chijioke's head snapped up. His blood ran cold. How? How did he find him? Before he could answer, the man walked right into the office. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in worn, dirty clothes. His eyes were not angry, but held a deep, terrifying intensity. They were eyes that had seen too much. "Chijioke Aguri," the man said, his voice low and raspy. He didn't seem affected by the smell at all. It was as if he was used to far worse things. "You put a mark on my son." I did nothing," Chijioke stammered, standing up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You breathed on him," the man said, taking a step closer. His gaze dropped to Chijioke's hand, to the gold ring. The curse of the ring touched him. He is not the same. He wakes up screaming. He says the smell is trapped in his nose, forever. You have poisoned his spirit. Chijioke could only stare, his mouth agape. The curse could do that. It could leave a lasting mark. The man's intense eyes locked with his. "This thing you carry, it is old and it is evil. It does not just steal your breath. It steals peace. It steals sanity. My son is proof. You must end this, Chijioke Aguri. Before it ends you." The man turned and walked out, leaving behind a silence more frightening than any accusation. Chijioke collapsed back into his chair, trembling. The curse was no longer just his own private hell. It was spreading. It was hurting others. It was a poison leaking out into the world. And as he sat there in the deepening darkness, a new, even more terrifying sound reached his ears. It started as a low rumble, then grew into a deafening roar. It was the sound of a large truck, its brakes screeching, its horn blaring, right outside his car stand. The sound was followed by a sickening, explosive crash of metal grinding against metal, and the shattering of glass. The walls of his office seemed to shake. The curse had been challenged, and it had responded with a violence that shook the very ground beneath his feet. The world exploded into noise and pain. One moment, Chijioke was sitting in his office, trembling from the thief's father's warning. The next, a roaring monster of metal and glass smashed through the front of his car stand. A huge, out-of-control truck had veered off the road, plowing straight through the shimmering rows of his expensive cars. Chijioke had only a second to leap from his chair before the wall behind him buckled. A piece of flying debris caught him on the head, and everything went black. He woke up to the smell of antiseptic and the steady beep-beep-beep of a machine. The ceiling was white and clean. A hospital. He tried to move, but a sharp pain shot through his entire body. His head was wrapped in bandages. His right arm was in a cast. A nurse, a kind-faced woman with a gentle smile, was adjusting a drip connected to his hand. "You are awake," she said softly. "Thank God. You have been sleeping for 2 days. It was a very bad accident." Chijioke tried to speak, but his throat was dry and his lips were cracked. All that came out was a rough croak. The nurse helped him sip some water. The others? He finally managed to whisper. Femi, the driver. The driver of the truck is fine. Just some cuts. Your assistant, Femi, was not there. He had gone home. It was only you, the nurse reassured him. You are a very lucky man. Lucky? Chijioke almost laughed. If he was lucky, he would not be here. If he was lucky, his life would not be in ruins. He closed his eyes, the memory of the crash flooding back, mixed with the terrifying words of the thief's father. You must end this, before it ends you. It seemed the curse had tried to end him. He spent the next week in the hospital, drifting in and out of sleep. His body was healing, but his mind was a prison of dark thoughts. The doctors told him he would be fine, but they could not see the real sickness that was eating him alive. One afternoon, as he was staring blankly at the television, a strange, vivid dream came to him. He was standing in a familiar room, the sitting room of his childhood home. And there, sitting in his father's favorite armchair, was his father himself. Papa. Chijioke whispered, his dream self filled with a child's awe and fear. His father looked up. He looked sad and tired, much older than Chijioke remembered. My son, he said, his voice echoing as if from a faraway place. You are wearing my shame. Chijioke looked down at his hand. The gold ring was glowing with a sickly, greenish light. This ring, his father continued, I sought it out from a dark place. I was a poor man, and I wanted wealth. I was told it would bring me riches, but at a price. I did not know the price would be my peace, and then my son's peace. What do you mean, Papa? Chijioke asked, taking a step closer. The curse, Chijioke, his father said, his eyes filled with ghosts. It gives wealth, but it takes something precious. For me, it took my health. I was always sick, always in pain until I died. For you, it took the air from your breath, turning it into a weapon. It will never leave you while you wear it. It will only pass to another, if they take it willingly. The dream started to fade, his father's image becoming transparent. Destroy it, my son, or let another take the curse, but know the consequences. Chijioke woke up with a gasp, drenched in cold sweat. The hospital room was dark. It was the middle of the night. The dream felt more real than the bed he was lying on. It was an answer. A terrible, frightening answer. He looked at his right hand, the one that wasn't in a cast. The ring was still there. He focused all his will on it. Come off, he thought. Please, come off. He pulled. And this time, with a faint, almost sad sigh, the ring slid off his finger. It felt so easy. It was as if the dream, the accident, had broken the curse's hold on him. He held the ring in his palm, staring at it. It looked ordinary now. Just a piece of gold and a black stone. He took a deep, tentative breath through his nose. Nothing. Just the clean, sterile smell of the hospital. He breathed again, deeper. And again. He couldn't believe it. The heavy, foul cloud that had surrounded him for years was gone. Truly gone. Tears of relief streamed down his face. He was free. He was finally free. A few days later, he was discharged from the hospital. He returned to his mansion, a changed man. His body was still sore, but his spirit felt lighter than it had in a decade. The first thing he did was take a long, hot shower, scrubbing his skin as if to wash away the memory of the curse. He looked at himself in the mirror. For the first time in years, he smiled a genuine, unafraid smile. But his peace was short-lived. Adaora, who had not visited him once in the hospital, was waiting for him in the living room. Her arms were crossed, her face a mask of impatience. So, you are back, she said, her voice cold. She didn't ask how he was feeling. She didn't care. Yes, Chijioke replied, his voice calm. He noticed she was standing much closer to him than she ever had before. She hadn't even flinched when he spoke. She looked him up and down, her eyes sharp and calculating. Good. Now that you are better, we need to talk about money. My London trip. Chijioke just looked at her. He saw the greed in her eyes, so clear and obvious to him now. He saw the woman who had called him useless, who had only wanted him for his wealth, the very wealth the ring had given him. A plan began to form in his mind. A dangerous, cruel, but perfect plan. His father's words echoed in his memory, "It will only pass to another, if they take it willingly." "London is not necessary anymore, Adaora," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. "What do you mean?" she snapped. "Of course it is. You are still. She paused, sniffing the air subtly. A look of confusion crossed her face. She couldn't smell it. The monster was gone. "I am healed, Adaora," Chijioke said, his voice steady. "The accident, it fixed me." Her eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in suspicion. "Fixed you? How?" Chijioke shrugged, turning away from her and walking towards his study. "It is a miracle. But there is something else. Something more important." He made sure his voice was loud enough for her to hear. He picked up the small, wooden box where he now kept the ring. He made a show of opening it and looking inside. Yes, he said, pretending to be on the phone. "The ring is safe. I keep it in this box now. After the accident, I am too afraid to wear it. But I can never sell it. It is the real secret to my wealth. My father told me. Anyone who wears it will have riches beyond their dreams. It is my family's greatest treasure." He closed the box with a loud click and placed it back on the shelf. He didn't need to look back to know that Adaora was still there, listening, her greed burning brighter than ever. He had dangled the bait. Now, he had to see if the fish would bite. For the next 2 days, Chijioke played his part perfectly. He acted normal, but he made sure to leave the wooden box in plain sight in his study. He saw the way Adaora's eyes would dart towards it whenever she passed the door. He saw the restless, hungry look on her face. The trap was set. On the third evening, Chijioke announced he was going out to meet a friend. He hugged Adaora goodbye, a hollow gesture that she stiffly returned. Her mind was clearly elsewhere. As he walked out the front door, he didn't go to his car. Instead, he quietly slipped around the side of the house and stood in the shadows by the window of his study. He didn't have to wait long. Not 5 minutes after he left, the door to his study creaked open. Adaora crept in, her movements quick and furtive. She went straight to the shelf and grabbed the wooden box. Her hands were shaking with excitement as she opened it. The gold ring gleamed up at her in the dim light. She picked it up, a triumphant, wicked smile spreading across her face. "Stingy fool," she muttered to herself, echoing the very words Chijioke had heard in his dream. "You thought you could hide this from me. All this wealth, and you kept it locked in a box. Now it will all be mine." Without a moment's hesitation, she slipped the ring onto her finger. For a second, nothing happened. She admired it on her hand, her smile growing wider. Then, her smile froze. Her eyes widened in confusion. She brought her hand closer to her face, sniffing the ring. A strange, foul odor seemed to be emanating from it, from her. She shook her hand, trying to pull the ring off, but it wouldn't move. It was stuck, just as it had been for Chijioke. Panic began to set in. She pulled harder, grunting with effort. And then, the change began. Her face twisted. Her eyes, once sharp with greed, became cloudy and wild. She started to laugh, a low, crazy cackle that didn't sound human. Then she started to shout nonsense words, curses, and Chijioke's name. She tore at her own clothes, scratching at the ring on her finger as if it were a burning coal. Chijioke watched from the window, his heart pounding not with fear, but with a grim, satisfied sadness. The curse had found a new home. Adaora, who had wanted his wealth so badly, had willingly taken the one thing that truly defined it. She had taken the curse. She ran out of the study, screaming and laughing, a madwoman now possessed by the very thing she had coveted. Her boyfriend, who was waiting outside in a car, took one look at her and, terrified, sped off, abandoning her to her fate. Chijioke turned away from the window. It was over. He was finally, completely free. He looked up at the night sky, taking deep, clean breaths of the cool air. He had his peace back. But as he walked away from the mansion, leaving the sounds of Adaora's madness behind him, he knew one thing for sure. He would never be the same man again. The journey had ended, but the memory of the curse, and the price of his freedom, would be with him forever. Let's be honest, wasn't Chijioke just a shallow and arrogant man who deserved to be alone? If he wasn't so obsessed with his wealth and status, maybe he would have noticed his own problem years earlier. Isn't his pride the real villain of this story, not the curse? What did you think?